All right, we finished part one, creating the graphic, and we're going to head into creating the tween. First and foremost, let's talk about what a tween is. If you think, it's part of another word, which is called in between or between. And what that's going to refer to is the frames in between to what's called keyframes, which I'll get into in a second. The glory of Animate and a lot of animation programs is that computers allow for the in-between stuff to be sort of created and generated by the computer. Back in the day, if you were creating an animation, you needed to draw every single step. Those were called cells, and those that was quite a bit of work. So we can sort of state, and you'll see that something exists in a certain space, and then it exists in another space, and the in-betweens will sort of be generated. So let's head into creating the tween. I've left off where we created the graphic. So step one of part two says click on scene one in the top left. You'll see that I pop back over to the stage, and my green ball is sort of sitting over here in the library. Step two, it says take the graphic from the library called green ball and drop it down on the stage bottom left. We'll see how we did here. I think that's a fine size for this. If we wanted to, if it was too big, too small, we could go back into our library, into the graphic, and sort of change it, redraw it, do something so that it's appropriate for the scene. Okay, so I've simply dragged it with the selection tool down onto our stage. Step three says move up to frame 60 in the timeline and click on that frame. You'll note that these frames are sort of numbered per sort of every five frames. Please also note, and I'm going to sort of talk about this real quick, I went to modify document. Our frame rate is 24 frames per second. We want to keep that as is. That's kind of standard for this program. So, do the math in your head generally to sort of think about how fast things are going to happen. This is going to become very important when we get into projects. So I have 60 frames. This is approximately, 2.5 seconds. That's fine for our first exercise. It says on step 4, choose insert timeline frame. So I'm going to go to insert timeline frame and watch what happens in our timeline. It basically extends our movie out. I'm going to back up so you can see what was happening here. Right now, our movie is only 1 frame long. By going up to frame 60, and I'm kind of redoing this, insert timeline frame, we're basically extending our movie out so that it's 60 frames long. This is what's called the playhead, and we haven't done anything. We haven't animated yet, so when I pull this playhead to sort of quote-unquote play the movie, nothing is happening. My green ball is simply sitting where it was sort of stationed. We're going to sort of change that here in a second. Next it says choose any frame between frame 1 and 60 in the timeline and click on that frame. I'm just going to click anywhere in the middle. All right. Next, it says choose insert motion tween. So I'm going to go to insert and motion tween. Boom. Okay. You're going to notice that this turns blue. That indicates that we now have a motion tween there. We haven't done anything to sort of make anything move yet, but we're sort of setting up the parts. We're setting up the ingredients. You'll notice throughout the semester things turn different colors to indicate what we have going on in the timeline. Okay. Step 7 says click directly on frame 60. So I'm going to boom right there. And it says with the selection tool, the black arrow, grab the green ball and move it to the top right of the stage. Okay. So I'm grabbing this and I'm making sure I'm on that frame 60 and I'm moving it up here. Okay. You'll notice that you'll get this little, it's called a path. That's appropriate for this exercise, and we've just basically created our first animation. And we have what's often considered a tween frame. You'll notice that this is a little diamond and this is a little circle. There's sort of a fine differentiation between something called a keyframe and a tween frame. A keyframe sort of states that something is so at a given point in time. Tween frame works similarly, that it states that it is so, or it is in a particular position. I'm using the sort of generic phrase, this is so, because later we're going to get into changing colors, sizes, not just positioning. Positioning sort of denotes movement. We've changed it from point A to point B, and created a simple animation. Okay. Step 9. Well, actually, before step 9, let's check something. Let's move our playhead. Now, voila, we have our first animation. Okay. So if we've done this correctly, we have it, the ball, our green ball there, on frame 1. We have our green ball there at frame 60, and in the middle, these are called our tween frames. Okay. At this point, we want to sort of talk about saving. Okay, saving is important for sort of obvious reasons, but we want to save this so that we can test the movie. I'm going to stop the movie just for a second and set up a folder to save this. Okay, I just had to set up a place for this to go. So I'm going to go to step 9, choose File, Save As. Just like in something like Microsoft Word, you should know that when we file Save As, we are basically saving it for the first time, or sort of denoting that it needs to go in a different place. I am working on a Mac. If you work on a PC, this might look slightly different. You should have a folder, a hard drive, a place for your animation stuff to go. I just made this animation folder. And I'm going to save this as my first name, my last name, _ motion tween. So I'm going to do David Luke _ motion tween. And I want you to write your first name and last name. I don't want 100 David Luke _ motion tweens. I want your first and last name _ motion tween. For the most part throughout the semester, these naming conventions are going to be very, very standard. Please use them. You might get points off if you don't, because that drives me crazy with organization and grading. So make sure you name these things as I state them to be. So it says your first and last name _ that gives us a little space, motion tween. Now, as you know, just like in something like Microsoft Word, we don't type in, generally speaking, the .doc or .docx. We have the file format that we want to use. Animate, and I mentioned this in Anime Basics, used to be called Flash. They've kept the naming convention, the .fla, that's why that's there. And what's going to happen is, you're going to end up with a file that's called whatever your name is _ motion tween .fla. That's your master file. That's the file that works in Animate, where you can change things, and we're going to talk about the other file, which is a SWIF here, in a second. So I'm going to save this. You should see that saving or that name denoted over here, and there you'll see the .fla. Okay. Next, it says choose Animate. Animate document from the format window. Oh yeah, so we did that. Choose animate document from the format window below. That's just sort of the .fla. Next it says choose control test movie and animate. What this is going to do is basically show us our SWIF. It's going to show this thing in action. We can sort of always see how something is moving, but this is going to give us a real-time version of what our SWIF looks like. When you guys start to make your projects, you're going to be able to use your SWIFs in this control test movie in Animate to sort of see how fast or slow things are working. Okay, so here's my movie. I'll let it go a few times. It'll start to drive you crazy because it's simply going over and over and over again. But this is a good thing to use, especially when you get into projects, to note, and I will say this now and I will say it many times, if things are moving likely too fast, 99% of the time too fast, maybe too slow, but most of the time people don't pay attention to sort of how many seconds things sort of take in the timeline. So I can see that my SWIF, and you'll see that this is now called a SWIF. These are the files you're going to hand in. Unless you have a problem, unless I need to see something, you are going to be handing in SWIFs. Okay. So we've tested that. Everything seems to be working correctly. If yours isn't, go back, see where things went wrong, email me, that kind of thing. At this point, it says, once you've tested your file and know the green ball works, create a similar animation with a new symbol called red ball and animate that symbol from bottom right to top left. Okay. I'm going to stop the video and do that just in the interest of time, and sort of show you what I've set up. we'll I'll join you again here when I have that set up, and then we'll talk about sort of how we hand these things in. Okay, I'm back with a red ball. I've created a red ball symbol. I'm back in my scene 1. And the only thing and this is sort of step 14, the only added part is the new layer. You're basically repeating the steps, almost all the steps, to create this red ball. And the only thing we're adding is this new layer. And I'm going to sort of show this in the video, and I'll note it on the step-by-step, but it's a little easier to show in the new video. I have this little icon right here, and if I scroll over it, it'll say new layer. Okay, I'm going to use that same sort of steps that I used to create the animation with the green ball, but I'm going to do it with the red ball. Okay, the only thing we're going to sort of change here, it says step 13. I'm sort of going back a little bit. Animate that symbol from the bottom right to the top left. Okay. So I am kind of repeating the steps, and I'm not going to necessarily go over these. You should be able to now go back and, at this point, we're at step 2 of the creating the tween. I'm going to grab the red ball, put it down here. Okay. I am going to click on any of these frames. The one thing we can skip is pulling this out to frame 60 because it already is out there. And I am going to insert a motion tween. And I'm doing this quickly because this is sort of a repeated set of steps for the red ball. Okay, you're simply repeating those steps. I'm sort of letting you figure this second part out. We've done it twice. At this point, I'm going to control test the movie and animate. And this is what we're looking at. Okay. One thing I'll note is that the layers are kind of a hierarchy. You'll see that since layer 2, which contains the red ball, it actually goes on top of layer 1 below. Okay, we have a little potentially a solar eclipse happening there. Just notice that. But we now have 2 layers. This layer is the green ball. This layer is the red ball, and they're animated out to frame 60. Okay, we already control and tested that movie. The one thing I'm going to note, your last step, it says hand in the completed SWF file into the week 2 folder. Whenever you test a .fla file, it will generate the SWF in the same folder that .fla folder, or the same folder that the .fla is in. So you should go and look for, and I'll show you mine quickly here. If I find my folder. Oops. Not now. Pardon that. Here I have my motiontween.fla, and here is my SWF file. Okay, so you're going to see that they're in the same folder. Always hand in your SWF files. Don't hand in your .fla files unless I ask or unless I email you and say, hey, I need to take a look at your file. You're always handing in these SWF files. These are the compact, sort of compressed versions that are the files that I'm going to grade. Okay, so that's creating a motion tween. It's pretty simple, but it takes a lot of sort of legwork here at the beginning to get used to animate and sort of how it works. There's going to be one more exercise, which is going to be creating a shape tween, which is a little bit different. Email me with any questions. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing these in the appropriate folder, assignment folder, and you'll be graded as such.